You can teach somebody to get into VR probably in about 15, 20 minutes. What you think was VR last year is not necessarily the VR this year. It's the access it provides to the non-Revit savvy folk. It's difficult to describe it. I think the biggest saving we've made through VR is
Everyone, thanks for tuning in for another episode of Virtual Visionaries. On this episode, we have Chris Openshaw, who is Principal Building Automation Engineer at Cundall, and we'll be diving into how Chris and the teams at Cundall have been using VR, especially on mission-critical projects. So I'm really excited to welcome Chris. Thanks for joining. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me, Angel. I work as a Principal Building Automation Engineer for Cundall. I've been working probably for about 5 years exclusively on the data center market. Before that, I worked across multiple sectors, including kind of critical infrastructure, oil and gas, the automotive sectors in a controls career, probably about 30 years now in total. So yeah, that's me. And Cundall, just to kind of introduce as a company, are a global multi-disciplinary consultancy firm, and we focus mainly on the built environment, although we have other verticals we're involved in. And I work almost exclusively with our critical systems team, and we're focused on designing data centers, principally at Hyperscale.
So as a building automation engineer, what does a day in the life of Chris Openshaw look like?
It's quite varied, really. I mean, I get involved quite often with our other teams, so the electrical teams, the mechanical teams, and it's really about automating the systems that those folks provide and looking around the support to the data center itself. So we are really looking at the life support system for data centers and automating that, providing information, and just giving the ops guys a window into the systems that are running the data center and keeping it cool, if the light's on, if you like.
That's very important. So let's dive into mission critical and data centers a bit more, maybe just at a high level for people listening. Yeah, how would you describe the overall function of a data center?
It's really the white space is king. So when I say white space, that's where the servers live. That's where all the computations are going on. That's where client's data is being stored and manipulated. So it's for us, it's a building. It's a technology building that houses all that equipment, and that equipment generates a lot of heat. It needs a lot of power, especially at the scale we work at. So really, it's wrapping that white space round with the supporting services it needs to function, and keeping it on normally with 5 nines of reliability, 99.999% reliability is quite often a requirement. So that then leads to systems that are highly redundant and unavailable, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's not a dusty closet in the corner of the room with a few servers in it, like some people have in their perceptions of what a data center is.
And so with these data center projects, what are some of the unique challenges that you all face day to day that might be different than, say, a hospital or building a school or a factory? What do you think is unique about data centers?
I think it's probably the speed of the industry. I mean, it's such a fast-paced market. Everybody's clamoring for space, and there's more kind of from a supply-demand point of view. Most firms are looking for space for their equipment. So every data center is on a tight deadline. We're always trying to deliver as quickly as we can. It's about scale as well and repeatability. So we're trying to deliver at scale with as much repeatability as we can to reduce the engineering kind of effort, whilst maintaining a very high level of quality in that engineering and delivering to clients to meet those tight deadlines. Quite often space has already been sold before we get the design. So they might have already allocated that space. So the deadlines for the tenants that may be moving into that space are not necessarily going to move. So it's very important we kind of support our client base with an on-time delivery and a right first time kind of principle.
Talk to me about your introduction to VR. Did you try it with a game or some roller coaster at first, a movie, or was it straight away reviewing buildings?
This is kind of a bit of a two sort of step process. I spent a huge amount of time when I was younger playing games, right? So I've spent a lot of time playing Doom, GoldenEye, Halo, and that's obviously it's on a 2D screen, but it's a 3D immersive environment for free roaming where you can move around and do stuff. So I've always kind of had that mindset where I enjoy being in a three-dimensional space and being able to move around. So that was kind of my introduction to 3D worlds, if you like, or 3D environments. I spent a little bit of time playing on the HTC Vive when it came out, and the original Oculus Rift. but the kit was so expensive. It needed, basically a real high quality games grade machine to run it. And 9 times out of 10, you were tethered. So you're kind of running around with a cable out the back of your head. And it just felt a bit clunky. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it. So yeah, it was kind of I dipped my toes in the water from a gaming point of view, but didn't really I didn't invest in the equipment and didn't have a gaming setup at home. So that was kind of like my first experience. And then I guess a fast forward to a consultancy I worked with when I initially came into the data center market. They had a process that they were going through of assessing different software solutions to allow people to get into VR. So we went through about 5 different software platforms, and I was privileged to have an opportunity to get in a headset and try these different guys on for size and have that kind of assessment. That was kind of really my first introduction of how you could start to then take that VR experience and then apply it to a built environment. And from a consultancy point of view, how we would leverage that to augment what we were already doing with the 3D model.
And back then, do you remember what the impetus was for that consultancy to want to look into VR? Was it, was there a specific client or project, or was it just, hey, this stuff is coming back up, we should stay ahead of it? What was the motivation?
I think it was curiosity more than anything. I think there's certainly an enlightened BIM engineer that I work with who had a passion for it and could see that there was a potential, use case for it. But I think very much at that time, we're talking about 2018, around that time, we were just like, this is some really cool stuff, and let's see what it is, if it's really ready for us to use, from a workflow point of view, and just to see what the market could deliver for us.
And so as you folks are investigating and trying different apps, I imagine you tried to adopt it. Were there any challenges you hit in trying to get it on board?
Yeah, as I said before, like you needed a games grade machine. You needed to have what they call the motion sensors on poles that were kind of
lighthouses.
The lighthouses. Yeah, there you go. Obviously, you needed the headsets that were very expensive, and so the kind of staging to allow you to get into VR really, meant that you were really set up in a room. There was quite a lot of preamble to getting into VR, and then obviously you needed to get the BIM model and export it in a format that then could be run in that VR environment. So there was like a multi-stage process to kind of get you immersed, and I think that was probably something that we found at the time was prohibitive.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people listening that story will resonate with them. I think a lot of people, like you, say about 8 years ago or so, tried something like an HTC Vive or Rift, were interested in it, dabbled with some of the apps, but ultimately found that it was a little too cumbersome to use repeatedly. And so sometimes it got shelved, to only using for the very large projects or these large bids where it made a lot of sense. Fast forward to today, a lot has changed, and maybe we'll touch on that a little bit. But I do think that journey will resonate with people listening. Maybe before we move on here, I am curious, if you've used VR now at least twice from what I gather, once at the consultancy, now at Cundall, those times, what were some of the things you were looking for when you were evaluating the software and even the workflow? What had to work for you?
When you're in an immersive environment, it's really important that it's fluid in terms of the way you can move around. There's nothing worse than being in an environment where you're kind of looking and everything's rendering really slowly, and you're kind of like, you lose that kind of immersive experience if things are taking time to render in front of you. You want to be able to move around the environment in a kind of as natural way as possible. So certainly the speed of the software and its ability to render accurately in front of you was important. The actual means to move around within the environment, so if you're using joysticks or whatever the controls might be, just making that as intuitive as possible, so you didn't really have to think about moving, you just moved where you needed to go, and the controls were easy to pick up. I think that was really important. I think having a means to identify things that you've seen in the VR environment and then take them back into the real world, so then you can act upon those things that you've noticed and do that in a way that doesn't mean that it becomes a kind of a staccato, do something, stop, come out, document it, then go back in and then carry on. And then, do you understand what I mean? You want to be able to kind of roam around the environment, look around the areas that you need to look at, document what you see as you go along, but not have to keep coming out of the environment to kind of take notes, if you like. I think that was super important because, it's not just a go in and have a wander around. You're in there with purpose, and that purpose is to really assess the area that you're looking at and then kind of identify the things that you've seen that need to be acted upon. So yeah, that was definitely one of it. And obviously the ability to get into the VR environment really relies on being able to go from your BIM model to VR. So one of the things we were looking at was how complex and how slow or how fast could we get out of our current model and get it into a VR environment and then use it. Because if you're talking about overnight rendering or to create a package where you can go in, then, that's prohibitive if you're having to do that on a nightly basis. You want something you can, update Revit in one hour, in the next hour you're looking at it in VR or less if possible.
What I'm gathering from that is you saw the value in VR. You wanted to add it to your workflows, but you wanted to minimize all the work. So setting up the devices, rolling in a laptop with a computer or with a GPU, prepping models, going in and out of VR to take notes, anywhere you can cut away time that was just added because of the introduction of the technology, you want to do away with and just seamlessly introduce it. And that is a huge part of our values at Resolve. We want to make it as invisible as possible, so to speak. We want it to just blend in with your workflows and really just augment what you're doing. So now you are using VR at Cundall on these data center projects. Can you walk us through what does a typical VR review look like on one of your projects? What headsets are you using? Who's reviewing what? If you can paint a picture for us, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I think there's probably 3 different settings for a review. So I personally, as a discipline engineer, will get into VR, maybe in isolation, and look at the things that are important to me, and I'll do a room by room review or area by area review, do that systematically. So I'll be looking at, equipment that I'm expecting to be placed within the model, making sure it's in the right place, making sure it's accessible, making sure it's set at the right height, making sure it hasn't been put in upside down or back to front. So I'm looking really at what I call soft clashes or, things in the wrong place or things not where they should be. Because we'll use Navisworks, and Navisworks is fantastic for clash detection. So if I've got a hard clash, Navis will pick that up all day long, and our BIM team will pick those up and we'll have reviews on those. I'm looking for the things that a hard clash detection can't pick up, and it needs an engineer to go in and have a look at it to go, actually that panel's sitting, 200 mil off the wall when it should be up against the wall, or that panel is sitting off the deck and it should be floor mounted, or that sensor is now sitting at 1800 mil off the floor and actually it should be sitting at 1200 mil because we've got an accessibility requirement in that space, and it needs to be able for somebody who's disabled to reach the sensor or the switch. So it's kind of that, going in and looking at it from an engineering point of view rather than a BIM point of view, and really getting in the model and assessing my design to see whether we've actually met the brief and that we've actually got the equipment that we need to support the spaces. And fundamentally, if I'm going up to something that I'm going to need to maintain, have I got the space around it to get to it? Have I got the space to withdraw it and get it out? It's all of those kind of design nuances that I think, an engineer who's in the space can see almost innately. You look at it and go, that's not going to work. I've got a variable speed drive up against a wall. We need to rotate that round so it's, facing into the hole so you can see the display and you can do it. You ideally, you want to place everything perfectly in the model, but in practice, we're working at speed, we're working multi-disciplinary, we've got lots of contributors contributing into these models. At the size we work at, the majority of projects, we've got individual models that then get federated together. So you've got different folks that are working at different speeds and working on different areas. So things come together kind of at a different rate for different disciplines. So, I'm looking in spaces to make sure things are right. So that's me on my own, just sitting there, checking to make sure that my stuff is where it should be and has been incorporated correctly. Then we would have a multidisciplinary workshop. So we'd have maybe a group of our engineers, MEP engineers, might be the civil and structural guys also included in that. And we'll pick on an area that's congested or needs coordination or needs special focus from a multidisciplinary point of view. And we would be in that environment, maybe some guys on the headset, some folks on the desktop app. So we use the desktop app quite a lot, which gives us the ability to people to join that environment without physically putting the headset on, which is super powerful. And then we'll probably be streaming it over Teams as well and having folks who are watching and following along on a Teams screen who can then, see what the lead BIM engineer probably would be broadcasting that over Teams, and then they'll be joining in as well. And then as a team, we'll go and review an area. Folks that are in the desktop app and in the headset can go off and have a look at things in and around that area. So not everybody's kind of just looking at what the BIM engineer is showing them. They can go and look at their own thing, which is really helpful because you can kind of, even when you're in the space, you're not kind of locked into just one view. Everybody can see what they need to see. And as a team, we'll assess that. And then we'll go and, look at things like access and maintenance. We might have a congested corridor where we're looking at containment at different levels and step overs and how things are all coordinated together and make sure that we provide a space that, meets the brief and delivers on, the engineering requirements. Some of these data centers will have MUPs that are going up at high level. And we need to make sure that, that MUP can go up into a corridor of space, and that then you can get access to pipes, and you can get access to valves, and folks that are constructing the data center can get into the containment trays to put the cables in without, impediment. So there's lots of different facets of a design that, you as a team, when you get in there and start assessing it, you can see the different tessellation of that equipment and how it all kind of stacks together. So that's kind of the setting 2. And then setting 3 would be, we would be having a wider review, maybe with the client, quite often with the client or other folks who are other external stakeholders. And we will be getting into the environment. And again, some of our clients have got headsets, and they might be in there, or they might be on the desktop app and following through on the desktop app as well. And that's a little bit more of a high level, more, we've got an area we want to kind of showcase that to our client, and then get client feedback on that. So yeah, that's kind of the 3 settings that we would probably use it in on projects currently.
Yeah, thank you for the very clear picture. I think it's fascinating to hear how many different use cases and different personas are using the technology on your projects. The first thing that comes to mind is a lot of people have this misconception that VR is just for the BIM engineers, right? That it's going to be for the highly technical BIM folks, the ones who are already spending lots of time in Revit and Navisworks. You've described so many other people besides the BIM engineer. Can you maybe touch on, how did you folks get to a point where it wasn't just BIM engineers using it? Sounds like everybody.
Yeah, I think there's a group of very highly skilled folks within Cundall who Revit is like their bread and butter. They live and breathe Revit, right? And they can pull up a section and, pick things up and rotate it around and drill right down to the things they need to see. And they're amazing at it, and hats off to them. There's also probably folks within our business who are technically very gifted and very capable, but they're not necessarily gifted and capable at Revit to that level. So for me, the environment through the tools we've got now with VR gives access to the engineering folks as a right the way across. There's no kind of bar that you need to meet in your Revit or Navis skills to be able to get access. You can teach somebody to get into VR probably in about 15, 20 minutes and get them quite happily in the environment. So I think it's the access it provides to the non-Revit savvy folks that really is the thing that I think is so empowering, because the more eyes on you've got on the model, the more people who are looking at it on a daily basis, the more people that are in there identifying issues and refining the quality of that 3D product that you're going to deliver to your clients, the better it is and the more we catch. So I think it's that kind of knocking down barriers so that you don't have to be proficient in these incredibly powerful tools, that by their incredibly powerful tools that they are, you need to have quite a decent depth of skill set to be able to use them to a level where you can really get around the model. And I think even, our Revit engineers with very, very powerful machines would concede that if you're going to do a model review, the environment that Resolve provides is a much more accessible and easy to navigate environment than those design tools, because they are design tools, right? They're there really from a design perspective, not necessarily from a reviewing the environment, although you can do it in those environments too.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, if I was trying to collaborate on a presentation with you and I sent you a Photoshop file, right? Like now it's a lot more overwhelming than if I just said, hey, here's the PDF, add comments and let me know what you think.
Yeah.
I think there's a time and place for all tools. I'm not saying that Resolve is replacing Revit. We are augmenting those workflows. And I think, to your point, it's really important for people to just identify when one tool is the right one for the job. So yeah, I appreciate that insight. When do you folks decide to use VR? Is that something you agreed on at the beginning of a project and you say, hey, at these milestones, because you have these 3 use cases, I think for maybe number 1, where it's just you or individual engineers doing QA, QC, that's probably more ad hoc, right? You kind of have this intuition of, hey, I should go review this thing that is part of the package I'm working on right now. What about some of these larger ones that involve more people? How is that schedule determined? I
think it's milestones within projects. So most of our projects are kind of stage gated, either using Reba or using other kind of stage mechanisms. So we would pick key points within our design life cycle to go and have a look at those aspects, normally as we're about to release at a key stage, and go and review as a team. And normally that culminates in a release to the client, and then that obviously then provides an opportunity for a client workshop, normally at a page turn or something similar. So I think naturally, as a result of the design activities, we've got those kind of gates, and they form quite useful points as touch points with the design for reviews.
What would you say are some of the biggest benefits that Cundall has observed from deploying this technology?
I think the biggest saving we've made through VR is cumulative, and it's cumulative by adding up all those small things that, if you hadn't have picked up during the design process, would have got picked up on site and would have cost potentially your client money to fix on site. So I think it's a cumulative. It's about design refinement for us from a design perspective. You're finding things in the design early, you're catching them so that you're not creating, problems multiplied across the design. I think from a coordination point of view, we're able to, get really tight coordination. So the value proposition, it's providing a product that we can stand behind that's of a really high quality as a result of all of those incremental updates that we've been able to make. And I think the real great thing about the tight integration with the product we're using with Resolve and BIM 360 issues, or ACC as it's now become, is the fact that you can go around in the environment, and as you see things, you can drop a pin on the problem. You can quickly either use speech to text or tag it with something that's already predefined text, and then move on to the next one, right? And then you kind of lay yourself a trail of breadcrumbs to come back on. You can come out of the environment and you can see all of those issues that you've generated really quickly during your review. And you're not kind of bogged down with trying to write things down as you're going along. And then you can add a bit more detail if you need, and then you can elevate those to BIM 360 issues. And that way you maximize your time in the space, and you maximize the amount of value. And I think from a human point of view, if I've got a system that requires me to do a lot of work to identify those issues, I'm naturally probably going to pick the big ticket items to report and not necessarily drop all those pins on all of those things that I've actually seen as I've gone through. I think that's human nature, right? So if you've got a system that needs a lot of effort and a lot of lift to document those issues, you might kind of see something that's a little bit out of kilter. I'll leave that one. I'm going to move on to the next one, and that's a big ticket item. I'll report that one. Whereas with the VR system, you just drop pins as you go around, because it's dead easy to elevate those to issues, to report those within the system, and to make sure that nothing gets left behind. So, and I think that's how we've come to the point with the feedback that we're getting, which is, the models that we've used, where we've used these tools, are some of the best models and the most coordinated models that we've seen.
Wow. So it's really elevating the quality control.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's empowering to have people in the model who are able to then go and kind of identify an issue. You can tag it with which discipline needs to go and have a look at it, and it's very quick and easy, and the ease of raising an issue propagates issues being raised, and folks get used to the tools, the speed with which you can do it, and then you get more interaction between teams, because you drop a pin and the next thing is it pops up on their radar as something that they need to look at. And it's very easy to go into the issues system and look at what issues are raised against tagged against your discipline, and then go through and fix them up.
This really reminds me of something another customer of ours said recently, and they actually also work on data centers. The metaphor he used is, if you were doing a scavenger hunt and you had, say 100 people, would you prefer that all 100 people are looking at one person's camera feed as they look for items in the scavenger hunt, or that they all break off into groups and go, maximize the eyeballs around the room, or, whatever you might be looking for? And this is what I'm hearing from you, Red, is you've just got more eyeballs. The chances of catching certain issues just are a lot higher. And then you also maybe let people apply their expertise to the parts that they know, right? Rather than dragging, let's say, electrical guys along for a review of mechanical stuff being screen shared, which is maybe not pertinent to them.
Yeah, and I think you see incidental things as well, right? So I'm going up to have a look at a pressure transmitter or a duct, for example. And in the meantime, I've spun around in VR and I've seen that there's a piece of containment that's clashing, some electrical containment that's clashing with a fire containment, for example. So although I'm in there reviewing my things, I see other things that are going on. It's really quick for me to just drop a pin in that, say electrical, you got a clash here, go and have a look at it. And I'm done, and I'm back on the thing that I'm looking at, right? So you kind of get, just because you're physically immersed in the environment and you're moving around, you see other things that are going on, and you're just looking at it, that looks a little bit wrong. Let's go and have a look at that. But you can do that so quickly. It's easy for you to just drop a pin in it and then carry on with the things without getting too distracted from the task that you're in. And I think that's really helpful. If you're able to, like you say, get more eyes on different areas, and as you're moving around in the environment, you naturally just, it's just engineer's intuition. You just look up and go, oh, builder's work hole doesn't line up with the pipe that's going through it. You've got two things that should be concentric and they're not, and you just tag it and move on, and you see things just by being there. And the more people you have in the model, the more time you spend in the model, the more chances are of those things getting caught.
Makes a lot of sense. You touched on this a little bit already. Is there any other feedback that you've been getting from clients or from your other team members, or perhaps, at Cundall, about the use of Resolve?
We had a feedback from one of our design managers, and his words were along the lines of, this is the most highly coordinated design model of any project that we've ever delivered. And to have that, for a design manager who works for us and has seen numerous projects go out the door and make that kind of, I don't think that was made lightly. So that resonated with me, and I thought, wow, that's kudos to us as a team, but it's also kudos to the tools we're using that allow us to reach that level, right? I think that's certainly from a design management point of view. And I think, our clients have been, reflective of the fact that we are highly focused on delivering not just drawings, not just schematics, but delivering a 3D product that, from a design point of view, is going to make the next stage of the project easier because of the quality of what we're delivering.
If I'm hearing correctly, that trust that you're building with the client, the satisfaction, is one of those more intangible things that, VR contributes to say, hey, we're delivering these models that are higher quality than you've ever seen before, that will reduce costs for the next phase of the project. And, it's the aggregate of all these benefits that end up really making the use of the technology worth it.
Yeah, I think it's an enabler, right? So you're getting those skilled individuals that are within your teams, you're getting their focus on the product, and it gives you that window that you need to be able to see into that 3D world and find the issues and refine the design and provide a really high quality product. And it's an enabler. I don't think the VR product itself does that. I think engineers do that, but it gives them that window they need to get into that environment to really, produce their best work.
A lot of people find themselves wanting to use VR and sometimes might be up against some resistance, either from other team members, from managers. What advice would you have for them, to try to convince folks to at least give it a shot?
I think it's simple. Just do it. Get a headset, get a demo, be receptive to the possibilities of what the tools can deliver, understand the limitations, and just embrace that, future step. I think it's essential that you have a meaningful workflow, or else it can just be perceived as a gimmick. And, there's some great memes of me with a headset on, looking like Maverick from Top Gun that floated around the office, right? So it's breaking down those stereotypes. Chris has got the headset on. He's clearly playing, Arizona Sunshine or something on the Quest. He's not really reviewing the model. So there's all those kind of stereotypes that you need to break down. But I think, if you're interested, you're curious, you think there's a value proposition, until you put the headset on, until you actually get in the environment, until you do a demo, and you kind of see that room scale kind of ability to review and see what it is that you're trying to look at in an environment that looks like the room that you're standing in currently, but is actually a virtual environment. I think it's difficult to describe it, and I'd encourage anybody who hasn't had a VR experience inside a model rather than a game to give it a go and see what benefits there may be for the kind of work that they're doing.
I'll need to get that meme, Chris, so that we can make it the thumbnail for this video.
It's quality. It's one of the mechanical engineers snapped a picture of me while I was on a video call, and I split my sides when I swear it was fantastic.
We have to add some zombies to Resolve, the fun mode where you can do Arizona Sunshine in your data center. Okay, so as we wrap up here, I think you've touched on it generally, but I am just curious, is there something specific about Resolve that you like? And it sounds like you've tried many things, throughout your career, both 3D, non-VR, but also VR. What is it that you like about Resolve specifically?
There's two things. I think the engine that it uses from a rendering point of view is good, and it definitely allows you to run around in that 3D space untethered, which I think is fantastic. I think moving away from having to be plugged into a high grade PC, being able to use, essentially a consumer grade headset is great. The integration for me in BIM 360 or ACC, and being able to raise those issues in an efficient way and disseminate those to the team is really the power that I see from a workflow point of view. Certainly as a consultant, as a design house, we're constantly being asked to work at pace and deliver in a simultaneous engineering environment where we've got folks working in multiple models and working at, different areas at different stages. Wish to repeat myself, but I think that for me is really where we see the value, or certainly where I see the value.
And as we look ahead, what are you excited about when it comes to VR and AR in the construction industry?
So it's probably a couple of things. I mean, I've got to confess, I love the film Ready Player One. It's a favorite film of mine, and I can't wait for haptics to really catch up in VR. I think being able to touch and interface with the model physically would create an even greater sense of immersion. And I think being able to reach out and physically, flick a switch, turn a valve, and have that feedback and actually interact with the model, I think would be awesome. And I think if you could add that to models that are actually true digital twins, so that they're physically representative of the design. So, you could have, throw a valve, have water flow through a pipe, and actually have the physics of the system, not just the static model. So you could actually operate your digital twin. I think that would be, I know it's a big leap forward, but we're already putting a lot of metadata into our models. So, the flows, the pressures, the kind of the physics around what we're doing. There are other tools that we're using to model the, water flowing through pipes and air moving within buildings. I don't think it's a quantum leap away to have that information included in a model so that you're actually able to interact with the digital twin in a way that you could operate it and simulate that operation. And if you combine that with the haptics, you can actually touch the model and, turn the valves, press the buttons. That would be something. So yeah, I'd love to see that in the future.
Then you can operate the data center from home too, right? Just have robots
Absolutely.
out there and you're just at home flipping the switches. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, what you've just said is really, it's a great culmination of everything we've discussed in the last hour or so here, in that BIM has come such a long way in the last 2 decades or so. There's so much rich 3D data in engineering and construction projects. And now we're at, I think, the phase in the technology's life cycle where it's just about making more use of it, right? Because in my opinion, historically, so much good stuff goes into BIM, but then it usually just lives on someone's hard drive. And you were describing VR makes it more accessible, even the desktop app, these tools to make sure more people are interacting with it. And then what I've understood from what you've just said is the next phase of that is taking advantage of all the data that's in there to do even more sophisticated things and just walk around the model, right? Actually use the model as if it were building, which is really cool. Okay. Parting words here for people listening. Any other advice you have for professionals in the industry who are considering adopting VR?
I don't think there's anything else I'd add. I think it's definitely, I still consider it emerging technology. So I think you need to keep up to date with what's happening and how it's developing, because what you think was VR last year is not necessarily the VR this year. So I think be open to what's developing and make sure you keep abreast of it. And I think it's important not to hold on to your conception of where it's at the last time you looked at it. Even if you looked at it 2 years ago, it's probably worth looking at it, at least, every year or every couple of years to make sure that you're not holding on to an old kind if you like. So I think sometimes you kind of dip your toe in the infancy of an emergent technology and it kind of, you get a bad kind of read on it, and then you kind of put it on the shelf. So I'd definitely, not put off by maybe early experiences that weren't the best experiences.
I think you've nailed it. This is something we deal with a lot. People who we will approach about VR and we'll say, oh, I tried, HTC Vive 10 years ago and there were cables everywhere and it made me sick. And I spent, 20 hours prepping the model. And a large part of our job is just evangelizing how far the technology has come, how far the workflows have come. And I think people do need to revisit it.
Sure.
And finally, are there any challenges, pitfalls that you think people should look out for as they start their VR journeys?
The motion sickness thing, it does happen for some folks. So if you're going to go in there, make sure you understand all the aids that are there. I like the blinkers. So narrowing your field of view when you're moving around. I think that kind of tunnel vision thing that you can switch on as an option is super useful. I'd use the stepped rotation, not the free rotation. So, you go around in increments when you're moving around and panning around. That can be helpful as well when you first get in there. If walking is a problem, then puddle jump. So, use the opportunity to, jump to the next spot rather than kind of walking along in a free-flowing way. The other thing I find is useful is if you geofence a good size space and actually move around in the space rather than just sitting static and then looking around and moving using the controllers. I think that's really helpful. And I think that quite often gets missed. Like people don't geofence and then use a decent size area and walk around the space. I think that's helpful. And just try, like I said before, just try building a tolerance. If you're going to go in there and you find it, a bit funky, give it 15 minutes, maybe do that a few times, and then, build your tolerance up. I think it's easy to kind of like try it once and go, oh, this makes me feel wobbly. I'm gonna give up on it. I think that's probably those group of tips would be helpful, and just get the infrastructure in place and encourage teams to use the hardware, because there's no good having a set of headsets that are dusty and sat on the side and look like an afterthought, and you feel like we've spent that money on those things and they've just really good paperweights. You need to define some workflows as well. I think the workflows are important. Otherwise, it just starts to look like a gimmick and can be a bit of a phase rather than something that you embed in what you do on a day-to-day basis. And lastly, the one kicker for me is trying to get clients engaged, to get them understanding the value proposition and try and get them bought in, because it's much easier to then include that in part of your delivery if the client is already receptive to that as an idea.
Wow, Chris, all that advice is, I think, spot on. It shows, the expertise you've developed in using the technology on these sorts of projects. All right, Chris, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me today. I really appreciated it, and thanks for your time.
My pleasure.